Greetings and salutations, ladies and gentlemen. Really appreciate you guys taking some time out of your busy day to join me. In this one, I am going to go over my fantasy football MVP. So I'm doing this video for quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends as well. These guys are players that heavily overperformed their ADPs, guys that most of us overlooked, that I did not have highly ranked, and ended up helping us to cruise to wins and in many cases take home championships. What I wanted to do was look over how exactly I missed on these guys, what circumstances led to them breaking out. Now, these are based on my personal pre-draft rankings. So some of these are going to be fairly close to consensus pre-draft. Others are going to be wildly off, players that I liked or disliked more so than other people. But we're going to run down why exactly they overperformed expectations, hopefully get some insight next year into looking at players that might do the same thing as well, and just kind of walk through what they did for us in those critical weeks with a fantasy playoffs and our seasons on the line. If you enjoy the content, please like the video. That helps me out a ton. And if you have not done it yet, for whatever reason, please subscribe to the channel. Relentless Press is on our way to our first 1,000 subscribers. If you have not clicked that button yet, you can help me out a ton and help us get there. We're gonna start this one out with Justin Fields. I had him ranked inside the top 20 as quarterback 17. He's actually finished as a top 5 guy for the season. So needless to say, I definitely missed the boat on this one. After having a front row seat to the inadequacies of the Bears organization, me being a Vikings fan and all, especially when it comes to quarterback for the Bears, I had no faith that Chicago was going to do right by Fields and set him up for success. Now, in my defense, I was not wrong about that. The Bears did not have a true number one wide receiver, and their offensive line was really bad for much of the year as well. However, Fields, he ended up being too good on the ground that it did not matter in the slightest. Maybe the craziest thing about Fields is that he could be found on the waiver wire in one quarterback leagues after week 4. And honestly, you couldn't truly blame owners if they dropped him at that point. He was absolute garbage. However, he turned it around because he got to play my Minnesota Vikings and their sorry excuse for a defense. And after that, everything changed. Starting in week 6, Fields racked up an incredible 8 straight top 12 performances. Of those 8, 5 of them he ended up as a top 5 player at the position for the week. He was unstoppable running the football. He was threatening a ton of rushing quarterback NFL records, and he carried many an owner to a playoff berth as the missing piece that helped put your team over the top. If you kept the faith and stuck with him, you were rewarded handsomely. The next quarterback who was an MVP and helped take your team to the promised land was Trevor Lawrence. I had him just inside of my top 20 at 18. He actually finished as a top 8 player at the position. And just like Fields, it was never about the talent for Lawrence. It was about his surroundings. After last season's dumpster fire in Jacksonville, many were skeptical that a turnaround could happen in just one season. That's what I get for doubting Doug Peterson, I suppose. Lawrence was shaky early on. He had 3 finishes outside of the top 20 in his first 5 games. But once he lit up Indy in week 6, he never looked back. The additions of Evan Ingram and Christian Kirk were massive, as was the return of a healthy Travis Etienne. With an improved ground game to lean on and solid targets in the passing game, Lawrence thrived. He showcased his quick release and pinpoint accuracy. Lawrence posted 5 top 10 finishes in a 6-game stretch, and his only knock really could be seen as falling off in week 17 with a fantasy title on the line. Now, if that cost you, I get you wanting me to omit him from this list. But the big backpack that he used to get you up to that point makes him deserving of a spot here. The third quarterback in my top 5 MVPs is Daniel Jones. I had him way outside of quarterback 2 range. I was quarterback 26. He finished as a top 7 guy, and he was another example of how a good head coach can change absolutely everything. Jones should be thanking his lucky stars that Brian Daboll now resides in New York. After 3 straight seasons of mediocrity at best, Danny Dimes turned a corner. He threw for career highs in completion percentage and yardage, and he also showcased his rushing ability that had more or less lied dormant up to that point in his career. What is even more impressive is that he was able to do all of this without a legit number 1 wideout as a threat. He had plenty of help in the backfield, that much is sure, with Saquon Barkley having a monster bounce back season, but I am not sure that New York could have asked anything more from a guy who had Darius Slayton as his best receiving option for most of the year. Jones was a sub-20 finisher just 2 times after week 2, and most importantly, he balled out when you needed him most. To end the year, Jones had quarterback 1 finishes in the top 12 in 4 out of his last 5 games, including the overall QB2 finish in the championship game. That is pretty solid for a guy who was not in my top 25 come draft day. My next fantasy MVP at the quarterback position is Jared Goff. He was quarterback 28 for me, and he was able to crack the top 10. Nobody saw this coming, but we probably should have if we look at the history. After nosediving back in 2021, finishing as the quarterback 25 in that season, many had written the Goff father off. It was not a bad bet, but if you look at what happened prior to that year, we probably should have had more faith in him. Starting in 2017, Goff finished as the QB 8, the QB 9, and the QB 15, and then once again the QB 15 in 2020. This clearly proves that recency bias is a killer, because the Godfather just did what he usually had done, and this past season he just had better weapons to work with. Behind an elite offensive line, Goff carved up defenses all season long, outside of one mid-season lull. Many probably scoffed at picking him up when that happened, but it changed your season if you pulled the trigger, especially if you lost someone like Kyler Murray, which I did. Down the stretch, Jared exploded. He posted 3 top 7 finishes between weeks 13 and 17. He threw for over 600 yards and 6 touchdowns in the final 2 games, cementing a fantastic end of the year and bringing it home for managers who had the guts to trust him. Goff was a major hit if you needed a bang towards the end of your season, and he was probably on a ton of championship rosters because of it. The last quarterback who was an MVP for me is Geno Smith. I had him outside of my top 30, wasn't even really in consideration, didn't even think he was going to be the starting quarterback for Seattle. However, he proved everybody wrong. Geno was able to finish as the QB6 on this season. He made Pete Carroll look like a genius, coming out of nowhere to bring Seattle and probably your fantasy team to the playoffs. Geno had played in just 15 games over the past 6 seasons prior to winning the starting job this year for the Hawks, but you never would have guessed it by his play. Smith threw for nearly 4,300 yards, he made the Pro Bowl, and he forced Carroll into an offense that none of us knew that the Seahawks could even run. With DK Metcalf in his right hand and Tyler Lockett in his left, Geno went to the skies with reckless abandon. He tossed 30 touchdowns while leading the league in completion percentage. How the transformation happened exactly will probably always remain a mystery, but props have to go to Smith for never giving up on himself, putting in the work, and biding his time until the opportunity presented itself. If you were a believer and you plugged him into your lineup, you were rarely disappointed. I'm sure there were many other options for quarterback MVPs, and I would love to hear yours. Drop those down in the comments below. That is my list for you guys for the video. Remember, I have this coming out for running backs. I'm also doing MVPs for wide receivers and for tight ends, so keep your eyes peeled for those. Like the video if you enjoyed the content today, and subscribe as well. That way you won't miss any of the other great content I have coming out. This is Relentless Press. I am your host, Abraham Opatz, and I will see you next time.